If you've ever watched the evening news, you've probably heard something like this.
Indicted on dozens of felony counts.
A grand jury indicted him.
A grand jury has decided not to indict.
But what does all that even mean? What is a grand jury? What's an indictment? Does an indictment mean someone is guilty? We'll answer all these questions and more in our very first episode of Legalese. Let's start with the basics. What is a grand jury? A grand jury is a group of ordinary people who review evidence in criminal cases. Their job is to listen to witness testimony, view evidence, and ultimately decide whether there's enough evidence to formally charge someone with a crime. Felony charges can be brought against someone in two ways. The first is directly through the filing of a complaint by the prosecuting agency. The second is through the filing of an indictment by a grand jury. The prosecutor presents the evidence, and if the grand jury has a strong suspicion that the crime occurred, they issue a formal charge called an indictment. Now let's clear up a few things before we move on. 1, a grand jury hearing is not a criminal trial. There's no judge, no defense attorney, and no cross-examination. 2, subjects of grand juries are referred to as targets. And 3, an indictment does not mean that someone is guilty. It simply means there's enough evidence to move forward with criminal charges. The actual trial comes later. Now that we know what a grand jury does, let's talk about who they are and how they work. So who serves on a grand jury? Each California county has its own grand jury, typically with 11 to 23 members based on the county population number. The members are randomly selected from voter rolls and DMV records, just like regular trial juries. There are 2 types of grand juries, criminal and civil. Grand juries investigating crimes are convened as needed. Civil grand juries, which investigate government misconduct, are convened once a year and serve a full-year term. What happens in a grand jury hearing? A grand jury hearing is held behind closed doors. There's no public and no media. The prosecutor presents evidence, calls witnesses, and explains the charges. But unlike a trial, there's no judge and no defense attorney. The idea is to protect witnesses, encourage honest testimony, and prevent damage to someone's reputation if they aren't actually charged. How do grand juries decide what standard is used to evaluate the evidence? Probable cause is the legal standard used to determine whether there is enough evidence to justify an arrest, a search, or a criminal charge. Probable cause is a lower standard than beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what is required for a conviction at trial. It's more about whether there's enough evidence to move forward rather than proving someone is guilty. We'll explore probable cause in further detail in future episodes of Legalese, so stay tuned. Grand juries don't need a unanimous vote to indict. At least 12 out of 19 jurors must agree in California. If they do, the indictment is issued and the case moves to trial. If they don't, an indictment is not filed. How do targets present evidence to the grand jury? A target cannot directly present evidence to a grand jury, but they do have the use of the Johnson rule. The Johnson rule refers to the rule that prosecutors presenting a case to a grand jury have a duty to disclose evidence that may exonerate the accused, also known as exculpatory evidence. If prosecutors know of evidence that strongly suggests the accused may be innocent or that weakens the case, they are legally required to share it with the grand jury. Although the Johnson rule does not give targets direct access to the grand jury, a target can provide exculpatory evidence to the prosecutor for presentation during the hearing. Okay, that was a lot of information. At this point, you might be wondering, why? There are several reasons grand juries exist. Grand juries protect the public by keeping the justice system fair. They prevent weak or unfair cases from moving forward and keep certain investigations private until there's enough evidence to proceed. So next time you hear that a grand jury has indicted someone, you'll know exactly what that means and why it matters. Thanks for watching this episode of Legalese. If you find this helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more legal breakdowns. See you next time.